On today's Toolsday, we're going to talk about compact routers. They go by a couple names: palm routers, trim routers, laminate routers, and it may not seem like it, but there are different classes of them, different use cases for them. Now, there's two things I feel like I always have to say at the beginning of these videos. Number one, this is sponsored by me and me alone. I'm $1,000 into small routers here so that we can keep this opinion unbiased and uninfluenced by any company. In addition, these are the routers I chose. There's probably more brands, and I'm sorry I didn't test your high-end Italian router you got in the early 90s, but before you get your bloomers in a bunch, these are the ones I chose because I think that they're some of the most popular ones that are most readily accessible. One thing to note as well is the Milwaukee and the Ryobi, they did not have corded compact routers available. Of course, have a battery-powered Makita because I've already owned that one. But a lot of these other routers do come with battery options. They would be just the same as you see in this test, except for maybe a little bit less powerful with the batteries. Before we get into this, you need to think about, what are you going to use a trim router for? Is this your first router? And if that's the case, you're going to want to think about accessories like a plunge base or an edge guide. Some of them come with cheap edge guides, and a lot of brands have upgradable versions that you can get that are much more accurate and reliable. Does it accept guide bushing? Then if you're planning on using a dedicated router for doing edge profiles, like do you want to just keep an 1/8" roundover bit in it? Then maybe you're going to want a cordless router. I know I really enjoy my cordless router for that reason. I just keep an edge profile bit in it all the time. When I need to break some edges, I can just whip it out and go. Gentlemen, ladies, are you on the go? Are you on a job site? Are you going to be using it in a spot, but you like to use corded because you maybe want the option for more power if you're going to do the occasional groove or dado with your router? So we're going to break these into different categories. We're going to talk about different features. We obviously can't compare a cordless Milwaukee router to a corded Dewalt router because they're just not going to carry the same power. However, we can compare the accessories, the adjustability, the repeatability, the accuracy. So we've devised a series of tests that we're going to do, and I'm going to come up with some of my own thoughts for which router I would buy in each of those scenarios I talked about. So let's get into the test. We're going to start by checking the adjustability of a router, which I think is the most important part. So for this first test, we're testing a few things. We're doing accuracy and repeatability, and the way we're going to do that is I've marked with my marking gauge. I've marked a line that is an 1/8" all the way around the board. I'm going to change the bit, set it to that line, an 1/8. We're going to make a pass holding it down here, and then we're going to make a pass holding it with our hand on top and our hand on the side. And what that's going to simulate is any pressure. If you're like kind of in a weird spot and you had to, go against a wall or anything, it's going to test how well that depth adjustment holds up with just a little bit of pressure on the top. And a good router shouldn't move. Regardless how you hold it or what pressure you put on it, it should keep the exact same depth. So then we'll use a pair of calipers, measure the depth, we'll see if there's a difference. This will also give us an opportunity to check out the LED light and the on and off switch, which we'll be able to check out a bunch of times during these tests. All right, we finished that test, ran it twice to make sure that we were getting accurate results. The short answer is everything here from the Bosch over to the Dewalt was rock solid, didn't move at all. Everything Porter Cable, Milwaukee, and Ryobi moved. Porter Cable the least. Porter Cable, it's like, it feels solid, but it just moves just a little bit. Milwaukee was the most disappointing one because I had high hopes for that. It looks very nicely built, comes with great accessories, but it's got 0.04 of play in the mechanism, and you can adjust it when it's closed, which a router shouldn't do that. And then the Ryobi, we're not even going to let it continue the test because it can't hold the bit. The bit dropped over an 1/8 inch on one pass and continued to keep being all wonky, and it scared me. So we're going to take him out of circulation. Plus, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. To take the base off, you got to undo the clamp. So you got your clamp off, then you press down the macro adjustment. Then it hangs on this switch, so you got to reach your other hand around, push the button in, and catch the router before it falls on the ground. Absolute garbage. It just isn't worth even pursuing, even though it's by far the cheapest on here, although it doesn't come with the batteries. For the Milwaukee fanboys, I'm sorry, man, that thing is garbage. But let's talk about some of the other ones. Dewalt, I knew, I've used this one a bunch. I knew that was going to be solid. That thing is just rock solid. Makita, the worst out of the bunch as far as adjustment goes. Accuracy-wise, it was dead on. You know, you got the same passes whether I was pushing down on the top or holding it from the side. Ridgid did well, although the adjustment on Ridgid is pretty terrible. When you go, if you're like, have your hand down here and you're trying to do it, you can see this rotates down and you got to like rotate it back up. Also, when this is loose, it's like really wobbly, and although it does have a dial, which is nice, it's just not great, but it got the job done. Bosch, rock solid, and I think they designed it to be very, very rock solid with this three-way switch. It has a lock position, which is like, hey, I'm ready to go and cut something. It has a I'm ready to adjust it position, so then you just do it with this dial. The dial is rather stiff. It could probably do with a little grease, but I think stiffness gives you, reliability. It makes it very, very slow, which is what you want. You know, you can macro adjust it from this position and get it kind of close, and then you switch it to the adjust position and do this, and then when you're ready to go, you lock it down. If I had to pick my absolute favorite, it was the Dewalt for the adjustability. Of course, all of these were accurate, but as far as like mechanisms go, the twist on the Dewalt, the way that it works is you can go really fast and it moves pretty quickly, or you can just barely turn it and it moves slowly. And so I love that macro micro feature without having an extra button, extra switch like the Ridgid does, or the Porta-Cable, or the Milwaukee and the Ryobi. We're gonna talk about switches and lights and accessories at the end, because I feel like those are add-ons. They wouldn't affect my buying decision a lot because, most important thing is power and accuracy, right? So we're gonna move on to the use it and abuse it test. We're gonna route a bunch of grooves, we're gonna do some roundovers, and basically I'm gonna do 15 minutes of continuous usage with each router, and then rate them based on a bunch of different rating factors I have here. And we're gonna talk about those after the test. And I'll give you my final assessment at the end as far as, whether you should get battery or corded, as well as which one I would recommend. So let's move on to the use it and abuse it test and beat these guys up. One of the things that's great about doing these tools days and using tools side by side is you learn some things that you didn't know you really liked about a tool, and some things that you may have tolerated in the past that really are just kind of dumb. I've changed the order of these. They are now ordered in price, so cheapest to most expensive. Let me just say some things about what you should look for in any brand of router that I've sort of identified as the most important parts. Accessories. When it's locked together, does it move? I'm gonna address the Milwaukee here in 1 second. The collet. Check out these collets in these. The type of collet is so indicative of which ones were good and which ones were bad. The ER collets with the 4 sides, those routers all performed better than the cheaper routers. And the Ryobis, even though it looks like an ER collet, it's like stamped sheet metal. We threw out the Ryobi from the test because I wasn't willing to risk having a bit come loose and shoot in my face. So the fact that it couldn't hold a bit was a deal breaker for me, as well as the switch. Anything that has a switch like this is a bad idea, because if you ever put like a finger up there to brace it, or you put a second hand on there to steady it, it's going to turn off your router, which is super annoying. Accuracy type of collet, and then you want to think about the power. Now, one of the things that I really had a misconception about was the power of battery operated routers. Both of these battery powered routers actually were much, much stronger than I thought, to the point that it made me do a bunch of Googling and figure out that they actually aren't really much less power. In fact, in the case of Makita, if you use the 5 amp hour batteries, they say it's more powerful than their corded version. If you're gonna get a router and you don't use a compact router as your main router, the one you use all the time, I'd get battery powered, and all of these do come in battery powered, I believe. I didn't see a Porter cable, but that doesn't matter. That one's terrible anyways. If it's your main router you use all the time and you've got a plunge base for it and you're, routing all your grooves and dados with it, then maybe you want to get corded so you don't have to worry about running out of battery power. But other than that, I mean, they're great. These are the same batteries we started the test with, and we did about 15 minutes of usage for each route. And that's like actual routing time, not we played with it for 15 minutes. Like we spent a ton of time routing grooves and flush trimming, and we did everything like harder, faster, and like deeper than we would normally. Like we were doing 3/8 inch grooves, and normally I'd probably only do maybe a 1/4 inch at most. And we were flush trimming with the whole bit buried in the wood, which I would never do. So it was a great test, and we really used and abused these. So let's talk about the Milwaukee. I said that was trash earlier. I take that back, although with some caveats. I looked it up, and there are a bunch of reviews of people saying they had that same problem. And it is a bad design the way that this adjustment knob is. However, you can crank down on this nut here with an Allen key, and then you can lock it, but it makes it pretty tough to adjust. However, it does fix the problem. But because I know that, I would never fully trust it. It would always worry me to use it, especially on like delicate cuts that you had to get right. Maybe you're real far down on a project and you're routing out a groove for a door or a drawer or something, and you don't want to mess up your whole project. It would make me worried. However, if you're already on the Milwaukee platform, this is a great option. Everything else about it was fantastic. It comes with some great accessories like a dust collection, as well as this extra large base plate that is got a step in it that will accept the Bosch template guide bushings, which are great tools for inlay or tracing patterns. Let's go through maybe just a quick overview of each one, and then I'll give you my final recommendation of what I would get. Porter cable, it's like it wants to be a good router, but it's got the good, twist adjustment, but it failed the accuracy test, and I kind of verified that that was the case, and it wasn't something I did, and it's true. It moves. I couldn't figure out why, but everything else about it just feels cheap. It's like molded plastic, and you can just feel that everything is just kind of garbage on it. Especially, it's got one of those cheap collets with just one split down the end of it. So it's just not a good option because it doesn't have any benefits to it above anything else. The Ridgid is another one. It feels like Play School's my first router. Like everything's kind of chintzy. All the parts, move. They're really hard to adjust. This is so annoying when you go to lock this down and it presses down, and then you got to like flip it back up and lock it down. The macro adjust on it's kind of real cheap and tough to really mess around with too much. So was not impressed with that one, and it's got that switch I hate. Then the Makita, like I said, Makita fanboy here. The adjustment on it just makes it a non-starter for me. I've had this router a long time, and I didn't know how bad it was until I got to compare it to other things. It is super powerful, but the only thing I would use this for, because I do love the freedom of a battery, is I'd just throw a round over bit, leave it set perfect, and just always, use it just for doing 1/8 inch roundovers. My favorite routers were these two, the Bosch Colt and the Dewalt. Now, as far as pricing goes, the Bosch is a lot cheaper and not a bad bet. It's actually, I'd say, the greatest value in here. It's also what I would consider maybe the second best in here, but it's not second best by a lot. Like, it's really good. It's very hefty, noticeably more powerful than anything else except the Dewalt, which I'd say they're about the same. They're both 1.25 horsepower. It has a phenomenal collet. The bits are very easy to change. One cool thing that also has a little bit of an annoying factor to it is the lights are always on. I love that. When you're trying to set up cuts and get your bit right in the right place, it is cool when it is lit underneath and not just when it's running. The only slightly annoying thing is when you go to change a bit, they sort of shine in your eyes, and they're very, very bright, which is great for when you're working, but maybe not the best when you're changing a bit. The adjustment on it is the only thing that is not as good as the Dewalt. It is good, but it's small. It's only in one place. You got to kind of like reach around, and it's very stiff, which I imagine is very good for accuracy, but not great when you're like trying to set up a cut and move it around. But other than that, phenomenal. I don't personally use variable speed on my compact routers very often, so I didn't really play around much with those. The point of variable speed is when you have a really wide router bit, you slow it down, but I would never use a really wide router bit in a compact router. I would go with a bigger router because it's not safe. It's going to burn out your motor, and anything over a 1/2 inch wide, I wouldn't use in a compact router. Now, my favorite, also the most expensive, is the Dewalt. It's got really bright lights on it. The bits are very easy to change. I love the adjustment. It was my favorite one. You can sort of macro adjust it and turn it really fast, or really micro adjust. You can just turn it just a little bit. One of the coolest things about it is this base. I love to put my fingers on the side here. The Bosch has 2 great finger holes. but the rest of them are just round. And when you're doing something like butterfly keys, it makes a huge difference in the ability to really fine tune that thing and be able to move it around very slightly. It's also great when you're working on edges because you can put your fingers right here and stabilize it. But one of the coolest things about it, it's the only router in all of these that you can flip the base 180 degrees, which is amazing because normally I guess I would just take the screws out and move this base around depending on what side of a board I was trying to work on, but you don't have to with the Dewalt, and that I think is really, really cool. All in all, the Ridgid, the Porter cable, the Ryobi, those are non-starters for me. Makita, it was solid once it was locked down, but that adjustment knob just, it makes it, I won't buy another one. The Milwaukee, great battery powered option. It does have the potential to get loose, but you know, it seems like a lot of people do really love it based on the reviews I read, and that thing that happened to me doesn't happen all the time. But when it comes to which one I would choose, if you are on a budget and you're trying to save money, get the Bosch Colt. If you want to just get the best out there, the Dewalt, phenomenal choice. Especially because these are the two with the most accessories. One of the problems with the Milwaukee, you can only buy the plunge base as a kit. That's the only one I found. It didn't have a lot of other accessories. But Bosch and Dewalt, their accessories abound, and they are great. I used to have the Bosch Colt, the model before this one, and I had all, you know, the really nice edge guide with the fine micro adjust. It has a wonderful plunge base, and I've used the Dewalt before, same thing. It's got great accessories. They're very high quality, and I really can recommend it. Like I said, guys, I paid for all these routers. There is no outside influence. None of this is sponsored, and this is my opinion and my opinion alone. If you disagree with me, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments, and it would really help out the channel and allow me to do a lot more of these videos if you head over to the Katz-Moses store and check out all the great tools we have over there. Guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe in the shop. Have a wonderful day.